Someone commented on my Benito Mussolini video asking me to make a video on Yalta and Potsdam. So this is going to be a quick introduction to Yalta and Potsdam. Yalta and Potsdam were part of three conferences towards the end of the Second World War, which had a number of objectives. One was about winning the wars for the leaders of the Grand Alliance, or the Allies. At that stage made up of the United States of America, the USSR, and Great Britain. The other was planning the New World Order, particularly the reconstruction of Europe after the Second World War. Another goal was what to do with Nazi Germany after the Second World War. And by the last conference, the Potsdam Conference, it was about defeating Imperial Japan. Now, it's important to note that there was a conference before Yalta and Potsdam, and that conference was Tehran. So the Tehran conference, which took place in the capital city of the modern country of Iran, took place between the 28th of November and the 1st of December 1943. At this stage, the leaders of the Grand Alliance was Winston Churchill leading Great Britain, the biggest imperial nation at this point in time, Franklin Roosevelt leading the United States, the biggest capitalist nation at this point in time, and Joseph Stalin leading either the Soviet Union or the USSR, the largest communist nation at this time. At this stage, defeating Nazi Germany was still a major occupation. Now, it's important to know that preceding these three conferences was the fact that the United States and Great Britain would have not really been allies with the Soviet Union. When the Second World War broke out, Joseph Stalin made a pact with Adolf Hitler, what's known as the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, where they actually carved up Poland together. But the events of 1941 brought the United States and Britain on the same side as the Soviet Union, because in 1941, Hitler invaded the Soviet Union through Operation Barbarossa, brought the Soviet Union into the conflict, and Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, which brought the United States into the conflicts. So this Grand Alliance can be called a marriage of convenience. Nonetheless, at Tehran, they started to debate various things. There was the discussion about establishing a new organization to replace the failed League of Nations. This new organization would eventually become the United Nations. Also discussing about possibly dividing Germany. Joseph Stalin really wanted the Allies to launch an attack on Germany from the west, help alleviate pressure from here, because the Soviet Union was doing the bulk of the fighting against Germany, and an attack from the west would help alleviate pressure on his forces. The United States wanted Japan or the Soviet Union to join their war against Japan. But Stalin made it quite clear that only once Nazi Germany is defeated would he entertain something like that. Now, the next conference, the Yalta Conference, this took place between the 4th of February and the 11th of February, 1945. At this stage, a lot has changed. By this stage, it's obvious that it's only a matter of time before Nazi Germany is defeated. This is after the Normandy landings, or D-Day, as it's also known, where the Allies launched an attack on the Western Front. They had now liberated France, and it was just a matter of defeating Nazi Germany. Now, the various issues that were being debated, Stalin wanted influence over Poland. The land that he had occupied when the Second World War began, he wanted control of that part of Poland. And the Allies were a bit reluctant to give him that. They wanted Poland's borders to be restored to what it would look like at the end of the First World War. Stalin refused to compromise, and plans were divided about maybe taking away a chunk of Germany and giving it to Poland. So if you had to look at that on a map, the country of Poland that was established at the end of the First World War would basically be shifted westward. So as the Soviet Union take control over the parts that they occupied in 1939, to compensate for that land, Poland would get some of Germany. So basically being moved westward, and Germans who lived there would obviously be displaced. Over here, it was also discussed how they were going to actually divide up Germany into different spheres of influence. At first, the United States would have a spear, the Soviet Union would have a spear, Great Britain would have a spear. Later, France was also given a piece of Germany as well. Winston Churchill pushed this because, just like Stalin was arguing that he needs to occupy a part of Poland to serve as a buffer against any future attacks by a hostile Western force like Germany, Winston Churchill argued that France, especially at this stage in time where the United States is acting like once the war's over, it's going to withdraw from European politics. So Churchill argues that France needs to be compensated because France acts as a buffer to Great Britain against possible Nazi invasion. This conference over here, a lot of concessions were made by Roosevelt to Stalin, especially hoping to get Stalin to assist the Americans in the war against Japan. Now, the final conference between these three leaders would be in Potsdam between July 17th, 1945 and August 2nd, 1945. And by this conference, a lot of major changes had taken place. One of the most important is by this stage, Germany had surrendered. In May 1945, the war in Europe had ended. So suddenly, what kept the leaders of these three very, very different nations cooperating with one another was the common enemy, Nazi Germany. But now that Nazi Germany is defeated, and it's only a matter of time before Japan is defeated, tensions begin to emerge. Also very important is by this stage, the American president, Franklin Roosevelt, had died. He died in April 1945, and he's replaced by Harry S. Truman. Now, Harry S. Truman is sometimes called the Missouri haberdasher because he was a suit salesman, and he was in politics, but domestic politics. And he had just recently become vice president of the United States, and he wasn't fully briefed up with a lot of the developments that were happening internationally. A lot of the stuff was kept from him. And when Roosevelt died, suddenly a whole lot of responsibility and information was just dumped on his lap, and he had to do the best he can. He also felt that Roosevelt was too compromising with the Soviet Union. He began to see Stalin as kind of the new Hitler. Also important is when the conference began, Winston Churchill still represented Great Britain, but as the conference progressed, elections in Great Britain had removed Churchill and put in power Clement Attlee of the Labour Party. So a new leadership. So the one constant in all three conferences was Joseph Stalin. And this conference was a far more hostile conference than the previous conferences. Now the tensions between the Americans and the Soviet Union really began to emerge. While away for the conference, Harry S. Truman was informed that on the 16th of July, the Trinity test had revealed that the atomic bombs successfully exploded, and this acted like a bargaining tool for Truman. And he told Joseph Stalin that the Americans have a weapon that is capable of sheer and utter destruction, to which Stalin gave him a very dismissive answer. And the reason he said, yeah, that's nice. The reason Stalin said this is because Stalin knew that the Americans were developing an atomic bomb because he had spies who were involved in the Manhattan Project. But this conference is sometimes seen as marking the kind of beginning of the Cold War. This is just a very quick introduction to these three conferences. I will pursue more detailed videos on specific aspects of each conference as we go along.